Professor Peter Tyler. Is he here with us?
Yes, Peter is retired, but there are somebody that's taking care about.
Okay. Who's filling in for him?
Yes, Giorgio Castley.
Giorgio is going to do it.
Oh,
Excellent.
Giorgio,
Excellent.
yes.
So he's also with University of Cambridge, is that correct?
It is, yeah. Hi, Thomas. Can't believe it's been a year already since I last saw you.
Yes, it's been a while.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm ready whenever you are. I'm happy to wait a couple more minutes. I don't know. Just let me know and I can kick off whenever you like.
We can take well, why don't you introduce yourself? Spend the time talking about what you're doing and what your center is doing, and then unless it's already in your presentation.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. So as Dr. Anadi mentioned already, so I'm based at the Centre for Business Research. So we are part of Cambridge, the Judge Business School at the University of Cambridge. So today I'm going to present also on behalf of Professor Peter Tyler. He's based at the Department of Land Economy. As Dr. Anadi mentioned, he's emeritus professor now, but he hasn't really retired fully. So he's still in the game, if you like, but he couldn't make it today. So I'm very happy to present our work. So what we do at the CBR is very much focused on businesses. So my topic today is the Cambridge phenomenon, and we heard a bit from David Gill just in the previous session. My talk will be more about the employment base. So from the point of view of the businesses making up the cluster. So I'll talk a bit about the innovation within the cluster, the economic geography of the cluster, because these are the areas we cover here at the CBR. So being part of a business school, our focus is very much on the business side of things. Yeah.
Excellent. All right, well, go when you're ready, go ahead.
Well, great. I think I'll then kick off. I'm just going to share my slides. Yeah, can you see that okay, Thomas?
Yes, we can. Looks
yeah,
great.
Brilliant, fantastic. Thank you very much. So hello again, everybody. So I'm Dr. Giorgio Casselli. I'm a senior research fellow at the Centre for Business Research at the University of Cambridge. And first of all, before I start formally presenting my topic, I'd like to thank Dr. Anadi, also on behalf of Professor Peter Tyler, for inviting us to deliver this presentation. So in my talk today, it's going to be based on an ongoing research that Professor Tyler and I have been doing together with Dr. Andy Koch, also at the Centre for Business Research, with the aim very much of establishing how a high-tech cluster like Cambridge, and as I mentioned before, we heard a bit from David Gill about the Cambridge cluster, the Cambridge phenomenon in the previous hour. So I'm going to talk about how a high-tech cluster like Cambridge, which is at the heart of the so-called Cambridge phenomenon, might look in a post-COVID world. So the starting point of my talk is this idea of the Cambridge phenomenon. So the Cambridge phenomenon is a term that was first adopted in a 1980 Financial Times article to describe the rapid growth of the explosion, if you like, of the high technology companies in and around the city of Cambridge. And the Cambridge phenomenon has recently celebrated its 60th anniversary. The cluster has now grown to be one of the leading high-tech clusters in the world and is home to over 30 science campuses, including the Cambridge Biomedical Campus and the St. John's Innovation Centre, where David is based. So within that context, our research is seeking to establish how this cluster might look in a post-COVID world, looking at issues in terms of changes in shape or floor space requirements and so on. So in the research presentation today, I'm going to examine the performance of the Cambridge cluster before, during, and after the pandemic to answer two main questions. So first of all, how well has the cluster fared during COVID and beyond? And secondly, what contribution does it provide to the local economy when an external and significant shock like COVID occurs? So to put it a bit into context, and these are some numbers that David has highlighted already, so I won't spend too much time on it. But here the question is, how has the Cambridge business base evolved over time? Now, early assessments of the size of the cluster indicated that there were about 300 high-tech businesses in Cambridge in 1985, made up mostly by quite small R&D-driven companies, often academic spin-outs. And whilst the limited number of large companies tended to dominate employment in the cluster during the 1980s, the last 20 years saw a steady rise in number of small and medium-sized businesses, and also shift from a focus on R&D to R&D plus manufacturing. And again, a key figure already given by David, which is numbers that we have here at the CBR, the cluster is now home to more than 5,000 knowledge-intensive businesses. And these are corporates, so these are companies that are homegrown, grown and developed in the area. But alongside them, there are also very important non-corporate, knowledge-intensive research organizations like the MSc Lab of Molecular Biology in the area of biological processes at the molecular level, or the Sanger Institute in the area of genomic research, and so on. And then the third element making up the cluster is a series of international tech giants like Amazon, Microsoft, or Apple, who set up offices in the city. And again, one of the key figures of the cluster is the number of unicorns that have been created to date. I do have the same figure as David, so 23. One of the latest being CMR Surgical in the life sciences sector. If we then examine the size of the Cambridge cluster by decade, we can see that the process has not been linear. So there has been a significant growth in employment from the 1980s to about the early 2000s, followed by a slowdown during the mid-2000s, which was caused primarily by reductions in high-tech manufacturing. Growth then resumed in the late 2000s, with strong growth during the last decade, despite COVID and the UK's cost of living crisis. And this strong growth that we saw over the past decade, as you can see from the blue bars in the chart, was driven by fast expanding life science and ICT sectors, which are the two sectors right at the heart of the Cambridge phenomenon. And indeed, the fast expansion of the life science and ICT sectors meant that their contribution to total corporate employment in the Cambridge cluster has gone up quite significantly over the last decade, as we can see in this table, which is looking at 2010-11 against the most recent year we cover, which is 2021-22. And here we can see that sectors like biotechnology R&D, or IT and computer services, or software development and publishing, they all played an increasingly important and dominant role over the past decade. As part of our research, we've also been mapping where companies are actually located, looking primarily at the two sectors that are at the heart of the cluster. So as I mentioned, life sciences and ICT, with the aim very much of understanding the geography of the cluster. So here I provide an example for the life science sector, looking at the latest year we have available, which is 2021-22. And here what we can see is strong employment concentrations around some of the main science campuses in the area. And we have quite a few in the south of the city. We can also provide an equivalent picture for the ICT sector. Here we see a few more bubbles on the map, meaning that the number of ICT companies making up the Cambridge cluster is a bit higher. But the picture we get is very similar to what I've just shown for the life sciences sector, which is noticeable concentrations of employment around the city center, especially on the north edges of the city, but especially around several business and science parks that we have in and around the city. And one of them is indeed, as you can see on the top right part of the map, the St. John's Innovation Park and Centre. Now, what can we say then about the evolution of the Cambridge cluster in a post-COVID world, which is very much the topic of my talk today? Well, there has been much discussion going on about how the growth of home working associated with the pandemic has altered the need for employees to work in their offices, in traditional city centres, and high-tech clusters like Cambridge. So there are a number of questions that have been raised. So for example, has COVID changed the fundamentals? The fundamentals being the benefits of cluster proximity, agglomeration, which I just showed via those couple of maps, the attraction of living in a very picturesque city like Cambridge, and so on. So the question is very much, what are the longer term impacts on the workplace, community, and home working? And again, what are the possible impacts on land and property markets? So here the question is, how much of the existing stock of commercial and office space in cities may now be obsolescent in a more pandemic sensitive world. And again, we can talk also about a drive to quality of floor space provision, which has potentially affected the shape, form, and location of buildings. Now, these are key questions. We don't answer all of them in our research, but I thought of highlighting some of them with you. And indeed, within this context, there has been recent research published here in Cambridge, especially an issue in the Cambridge Journal of Regions, Economy and Society, showing that, and here is a positive message or positive finding, that high-tech clusters do remain places for interaction, diversity, and the exchange of knowledge. There are also data by Bidwells that have also been quoted by David in the previous session. And here the key kind of finding is that there are high levels of combined demand for laboratory and office space continuing, running close to record levels in Cambridge. And especially they exceeded 2 million square feet at the end of 2022, which was a 68% increase from the first half of 2020, right at the start of the pandemic. But here the idea is there is a huge demand for office and lab space, but not enough supply. So within then this context, how have businesses that make up the cluster grown since the pandemic? And this is something we are well positioned to shed light on, because this is what we do at the CBR here in Cambridge. So what we've been doing, we've been conducting, and this is right from the beginning of the pandemic, we've been conducting some work on assessing corporate performance within the Cambridge cluster in the aftermath of COVID. And especially we've published 8 updates on the corporate employment growth in the area. And these are obtained by sampling the CBR annual corporate database of all businesses in the area in April and October each year. And every time a large sample coverage is obtained, over 60% of corporate employment on average. And today, I'm just going to take you through some of the findings we have, drawing on the October 2022 update, where we were able to have a first kind of glimpse of the impact of COVID on the local economy, and also more recently, the April 2023 update, which allowed us to establish whether the initial recovery of businesses from the impact of the pandemic has continued during the UK's cost of living crisis. So first of all, let's look at the immediate impact of the pandemic on the Cambridge cluster. So this chart looks at, as I said, the kind of immediate effects of the pandemic by looking at employment growth in knowledge-intensive KI and non-KI sectors during 2019-20 on the horizontal axis and 2020-21 on the vertical axis by area. So here we have the 3 main areas making up Cambridge. So GC is Greater Cambridge, and we can focus on the bubbles for the Greater Cambridge area, so the green bubbles. And what this chart allows us to do is to compare corporate performance before and during COVID lockdowns. So what do we find here? Well, we find that corporate employment growth slowed down from 5.5% in 2019-20 to 2.5% in 2020-21, very much reflecting the impact of the 3 COVID lockdowns that we had here in the UK. However, it's important to say that this slowdown is modest considering the unprecedented challenges brought about by the pandemic. The lower employment growth during COVID was due to a weaker performance of the non-KI economy in Cambridge, so not to the high-tech cluster, but to the non-KI economy compared with the pre-COVID period. And that was despite the furlough scheme introduced by the UK government to provide support to businesses through the pandemic. Secondly, we can then look at the recovery from the COVID lockdowns. So this chart is equivalent to the previous one, but it compares employment growth during COVID, this time on the horizontal axis, against employment growth post-COVID, or shall I say, post-COVID lockdowns on the vertical axis. And here we can see that there was overall positive employment growth during the post-lockdowns period, and also much stronger than during the lockdowns period. And in fact, employment growth increased from 2.5% in 2020-21 to 6.7% in 2021-22. The faster employment growth in the area during the most recent year was driven by a strong performance of the KI sectors, so of the sectors making up the Cambridge high-tech cluster. In turn, non-KI employment increased by 1.8% post-COVID lockdowns after declining by 2.1% during COVID. So here, positive finding of positive employment growth, a recovery also in the non-KI economy. Thirdly, we can then look at whether there have been any lasting effects of COVID on employment growth in KI and non-KI sectors by comparing, using the same approach, employment growth pre-COVID on the horizontal axis against employment growth post-COVID lockdowns on the vertical axis. And here, in a nutshell, we can say that the results suggest that corporate employment growth in Cambridge has started to recover from the effects of the pandemic already in 2021-22, helped by the robust performance of the KI sectors. Now, for the interest of time, I'm going to skip the next couple of slides and go straight to this one, which is some of the latest data we have here in Cambridge, looking at post-COVID performance. So compared with the data that I presented last year, we now have 2 years of post-COVID data. And what this data allows us to do is to speak with more confidence about the extent of the recovery of Cambridge-based businesses from the pandemic. So what do we find here? Well, we find that employment growth continued to recover from the effects of the pandemic, and that happened despite the onset of the war in Ukraine. Growth in the area increased from 5.1% in 2020-21 to 6.2% in the latest year. And this strong performance, so 6.2% in a very turbulent period, was driven by a buoyant KI economy, which grew by 7.7% in the latest year. But I think it's also important to say that employment growth in the wider Cambridge area also benefited from the robust performance of the non-KI economy, which points to continued recovery among sectors that were severely hit by lockdowns and other COVID-related restrictions, the typical example being the hospitality sector. So just to conclude, the results I've just presented tell a story of strong corporate resilience during a very turbulent period, which in a way adds to the positive evidence provided by David in his talk. So we find that employment growth of Cambridge-based businesses slowed down during COVID, and that was largely reflecting a poorer performance of the non-KI sectors. At the same time, KI employment continued to grow at pace, and that was despite COVID-related restrictions, once again testifying to the resilience of the Cambridge high-tech cluster during very challenging periods. There was positive and much stronger overall employment growth in the post-COVID period, and that was driven by large increases in KI employment, particularly in the life science sector, which, as I said before, is together with the ICT sector right at the heart of the Cambridge phenomenon. Non-KI employment continued to recover from the worst effects of the pandemic into the autumn of 2022, when inflation here in the UK peaked at 11.1%. Now, importantly, our recent analysis also highlights the important role of KI sectors in enhancing the ability of the Cambridge economy, and particularly of the Cambridge high-tech cluster, to withstand significant shocks like COVID. At the same time, and here I kind of end on a slightly negative note, the evidence points to the expansion of the cluster being now seriously constrained. And I think this is a point that David also made very nicely in his presentation, by a lack of infrastructure with continued shortages of good quality office and lab floor space. So all these calls for further research into how a city and high-tech cluster like Cambridge might indeed look in the future. So I'd be delighted, obviously, to discuss any of these issues in more detail. So thank you very much for your attention, and I shall stop here.
All right, thank you for a great presentation. Any questions from the general audience? I have a couple that I would like to ask.
Yes, Thomas. Yeah.
I'd start with, again, the Cambridge cluster. How much does it mirror the UK in generally speaking, in terms of recovery in times, because there's a whole kind of different sector out there, right? And did you study anything other than employment growth? Did you study like GDP or other kind of things as well?
Well, thanks very much. These are great questions. So I couldn't include it in my presentation, but we are currently working, and actually I've got a presentation on Wednesday about it. So we are currently working on, this is the great performance of the Cambridge corporate economy. Where does it sit within the national UK, within the national performance? And here, very briefly, what I can say is that the performance of the Cambridge corporate economy, so remember, we're only looking at the corporate economy, has been exceptional compared with the national performance. So it's been a very difficult period, thinking about GDP growth, unemployment, the level of interest rates. But despite all of that, so although the nation has suffered overall, the Cambridge corporate economy, especially the high-tech cluster, has done very well. So that's in terms of that one. And then just remind me, the second question.
Well, just curious about GDP for the region, and again, if you studied anything other than employment growth.
So what we study also is turnover, so sales by local companies. And that is quite interesting, because what you see, so we had this scheme in the UK launched by the UK government to support businesses across the country called a furlough. And furlough was a scheme to protect people in employment. So to make sure that during the pandemic, many of them could remain in employment. So what we find is that the employment of the pandemic, if you like, was a bit muted on employment, but it was far more significant on turnover, because turnover was not as equally protected as employment. So then if you look at employment growth against turnover growth, you can see a much more significant dip in turnover growth during the pandemic compared with employment.
Thank you. We need to go to our next speaker now. We're running a little bit late. Our next speaker is Paul Sheedy, and he's the CEO with the Unify NID Limited. So please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. Great to be here again this year. Just going to check to see if we have.
Thanks, Paul, for making it.
Pleasure. Always a pleasure. So with theirs, we've got this camera working. So I got two different cameras now, so I'm going to have to turn myself around a little bit. So thank you everyone again for having us this year to present really what we're all about here, which is building occupancy. And I'm sure it's no news to anybody out there that the amount of work actually being done on getting buildings green and lowering our emissions is a lot of talk and there's very little action. Everything we're about.
Sorry, Paul. This photo, it's Canary Wharf.
Yes, that's correct. I
My God, I'm so. I see it only one time.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I've worked in that main tower for over 10 years now.
Okay, in the Canary Wharf. It's success?
Yes, it's expanding hugely. So these clusters of buildings down here in the bottom
My
of the
God.
building are all
Yes,
the new
yes, it's very
residential.
nice building. It's look like it's in New York.
Yeah, it's cutting edge, and really the whole area of Canary Wharf is transformed from just banking into many other companies, but also into leisure and restaurant. There's over 70 restaurants now, a lot of waterways for coming along, and shopping experience is quite amazing as well. So it's really been changing dramatically over the last while.
Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Pleasure. Well, you're more than welcome anytime. Okay. So I get on my presentation. This is a very famous, I'm Irish, by the way, but this is a very famous UK logo, which is keep calm and carry on. I'm telling everybody, don't keep calm and don't carry on, because actually the issue really right now with the environment is that is what's happening. Nobody's really taking this serious. Nobody's really changing. Nobody's instigating what has to be done. And since we last spoke last year, I have put together a team in here in the company to really work on decarbonization. In fact, we took over a decarbonization company, but I've been working on delivering return on investment modeling to look at everything to do with a building and how many of the ways in which you can cut your energy costs right down and cut your costs down will save you money immediately. And that's true mainly, actually, what you see above me, which is lighting. We found that we can actually lease out lighting over 5 or 6 years and immediately on day one save businesses huge amounts in cost, but more importantly, huge amounts in the energy that they're producing. And we've gone through everything to do with a building and shown them now that this is how you get to net zero. Some of this is going to cost you money, and you're going to have to decide if you're going to invest or not invest. And some of it is a no-brainer because you should be doing it right now. So everything we're about is managing. And the only way you can manage anything is by measuring it. And our whole core of what we do is the occupancy of buildings, floor by floor, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And once you have that data set, once you have that core information of what really happens in your building, and let me tell you, the UK, along with a lot of US, has gone berserk in that people don't come to work on Fridays anymore. Barely anybody comes in on Monday. So we've got like almost a 3-day week. I have to be honest, none of my staff, they come in 5 days a week, whether they like it or not, whether an Amazon package has been delivered or not, they're in 5 days a week. Because the truth is, unless we get people back to the offices, the whole infrastructure, the sandwich shops, the coffee place, it all falls apart. And this working from home, we've decided to take that moral stance and say, no, you got a job, you get paid, it pays your mortgage and your food, you come to the office, we collaborate, and we work better that way. But what we're doing is making sure that for those businesses that are being very, very badly affected by this, that they can start understanding the reality of what's happening in the buildings 7 days a week. Now, I've covered this before. We believe easily, as does JLL and CBRE, that at least 30% of the energy used in a building, commercial building, is completely wasted. And no architect out there can tell me they designed the buildings pre-COVID for the sort of chaos we're seeing today. And this is where you now need to take the building and understand really what's happening and how you should proceed going forward. And the sort of 5 areas we touch on is security. It's knowing who has gone onto each floor of a building. We capture the people who are tailgating in behind other people. The simplicity of our technology means we don't need apps. We don't need anything running in the background, which is going to confuse people. We help the reception teams on the ground floor, on each floor of a building, to know how to interact and engage with people. We deliver to your FM, your facilities management teams, exactly the data they need to know as to when they should do what in a building, based on the fact that a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday is very different to a Monday or a Friday. And as I've mentioned before, the safety and evacuation of buildings is crucial. Now, I'm very aware that in Kuwait, you're now building the Burj Mubarak Al Kabir building, which I believe is 235 stories tall. Well, somebody in Kuwait needs to be picking a phone up to me very shortly, because what we have is really going to be needed in these types of buildings. And as I mentioned before, our real focus now is on the net zero, how we help you deliver net zero and how we help you to engage with other companies. So we don't do everything, but what I have built around me is an ecosystem of people who know what they should be doing. And we're trying to connect all the dots with corporations. So very briefly, the way we make it and then tell a building come along and sing and tell us what's happening. Is we install very few number of sensor technologies in lift lobbies, in stairways, for example. And we use your existing access card, and we just make that a super smart card, embedding 2 or 3 technologies in there, no battery, so there's no change. There's no need for an app. There's no need for people to have Wi-Fi or geolocation or anything else off, which just doesn't happen. And this gives us back the data for you to analyze and help you analyze what is actually happening in your building and how you change. And last but not least, we deliver immediately triggers to act upon what you need to know when you need to know it, from a fire evacuation to a receptionist knowing who's walking in, to a security breach happening, to the data running to your BMS company, your BMS building management systems, to tell them what's happening. And in fact, the work we've done with UCL tells you in advance what's going to happen. And this is where we differentiate ourselves. And this is where buildings really can now focus in and say, right, we can cut our energy costs by 20, 30, maybe 40%. Again, what we do is we detect you from various different ways, from your card identification to anonymous people counting cameras to facial recognition systems, whatever is going to work for your culture. And to be very clear, culturally in the UK, face recognition is a big no-no. No particular reason for it, just culturally it's a no-no. Whereas we have offices, as you may know, from right across the US to China, and it's a different culture in different countries. But we'll find the right technology to give you the right data to make your building give you the secret that you need to know about. And behind all this, of course, you get deep levels of information about exactly why a certain building works in a certain way. Now, what I'm showing here is why this is so important to understand every aspect of the building. As I mentioned, we only do occupancy, but we work in collaboration with everybody. And this is an illustration of our office from a Wednesday to a Wednesday. Now, what happens in our office on a Saturday and Sunday is at 2 p.m., the air conditioning goes off, and we get a massive spike on only one side of the building. The other 3 sides are not affected at all. But on one side of the building where the sun shines in the afternoon, we get a huge spike as if it's a greenhouse. And therefore, you can start asking yourself a question. If there's only 5 people in a floor that takes 300 people, why don't I just my air conditioning on one side of the building and turn the rest off where it's not going to affect anybody, or change the way we work? And this is where we're trying to get through to people. If you only have 5 people coming in on Saturday and Sunday, you've got to ask yourself some questions. Why can't I ask those people to do something different and to work on a certain floor or a certain section of a floor and only power that, only air condition that section up? And again, when it comes to facilities management, it's looking at how many times is the main door to the toilet open, the front door to the toilet open. Now I get my FM team to clean per floor on usage, not on anything else. And this is where we have to move away from 2019 decision-making, 2019 systems of how we run companies and move forward. This is a scandal. So this is it's a relative, it's very unusual, very relative. All this food here got thrown in the bin about 4 weeks ago in London because there was a tube strike. And on that day, we monitored all the buildings in London, and we had a 41.9% drop in the amount of people we expected into work that day. And the reason for that is that at 3 p.m. the day before, the unions called off the strike. But people have made a decision. They decided, okay, there's a tube strike tomorrow, I'm working from home. And this is a consequence of the chefs here taking a normal Wednesday's occupancy, cooking for that level, and then realizing actually 42% of people didn't come to work, all goes in the bin. And this is important because if we can start predicting for your restaurant staff at 9:30 what happens, you can really change how you run your building. Now, let's get to how we're going to change. Right now, what we have in the tech sector is we have FM data companies, we have BMS companies with occupancy. We need to get everybody together on the same hymn sheet. And what we're saying to corporates is, the solutions for you to deliver smart buildings are all here today. Forget tomorrow, it's here today. But unless you as a corporate are going to pull in the various technology providers into a room, preferably lock the door with no toilet facilities and tell them, you work out my problems and I'll open the door. We'll get on, we'll do it. Because really, we're not a BMS company, we're not an FM data company. We do occupancy, but we can feed into that BMS company based on what we have, based on the data, the predictive analysis. That what will happen tomorrow is this, your plateau will look like that. How late can I turn on my air conditioning? How low can I turn it down? How early can I turn it off and not affect those occupants? And the same goes for FM. What should they be doing when they should be doing it? And what we've got to get away from is a siloed approach with corporates and with the tech sector, where everybody works in their separate areas. They don't realize that actually, really, everything here is interconnected. Do I need to have all 32 of my lifts working today when I only have 14% of people in? Do I need to have my access control system? The access control data will give you a certain amount of data, but how do I link this into other pieces of the equation? And by the way, on fire safety, it's horrendous what's going on right now. Let me tell you for fact, there was a situation that happened here and in my own office here. And by the way, I lease the office. I don't own this building. 4 weeks ago, all the lights went out. Every single fire signage on this floor, on the 39th floor of my building, was blank. Because, as I found out last Thursday evening, the last time the batteries were changed, the backup batteries were changed, was 12 years ago. So I'm here at 10:30 at night, lights go off, no fire evacuation signage anywhere, and every single fire door was locked. So no matter how big and shiny and glossy your building is, I'm afraid very, very few people are really paying attention to what's going on. And this is why I really do hope we can start working with Kuwait and all around the world on scenarios like the Burj Mubarak Al Kabir building, because we've got to all get a grip here, and we've got to start being really serious about where we're going. Now, I'm going to talk to you about some of the really simple wins here, as I mentioned at the start. This is a scenario whereby we change from traditional lighting to LED lighting. And the amount of money that this one particular building we looked at could save almost £100,000 a year. That is, we're taking everything out, replacing it, the labor, the parts. Day one, they save £100,000 and a huge impact on their CO2 levels. And this is where we're trying to get through to companies. Don't procrastinate. The days of procrastinating are gone. We've seen the weather impacts of the last years. And if we can show you scenarios where it doesn't cost you anything, in fact, you make money from it, that has got to be your incentive to move it forward. And what we're trying to say to companies now is, if we can save you £100,000 on your lighting alone, why don't you start looking at actually scenarios where maybe the sun isn't so great in the UK, but you put solar in place, and maybe the ROI model of that is 8 years or 9 years, but let's do the right thing. And there really are ways now to sort of move forward and make sure we see the right scenarios. Now, this, again, is not Kuwait. This is the UK. We get very, very short days in winter and quite long days in the summer. But this, again, is showing you the impact of moving to having solar panels on your roof, and how we can break down in advance from looking at historic weather pattern data, how much of that solar panel use will be worked directly, how much of that solar panel use you can put into storage on your battery system, but how many times you're going to have to go back to the grid and take energy from the grid. So this is showing you from January to December. I can assure you from November right through to February, it's a fairly bleak place to live, okay? Which is why we probably all come over to Kuwait in our winters. But this still shows you that your ROI, your return on investment, is around year 6.5. And exactly, we can measure out, because there's so much work being done on this, what the impact is going to be on the particular roof you have, on the particular size it is, on the aspect ratio where it is, and deliver for you what it's going to look like and what your return will be. Now, I'm also going to talk about AI. I'm going to be very clear. A lot of people talk about AI, and I worry about how much they do, because actually there's a lot to look at here. We worked at UCL on how we worked on predictive analysis, and this took us through looking at, with the data we have, tube strikes, train strike, weather conditions, how many people will be in each day of a week. And this is the exact level of data we got meant we can really give predictive analysis on how a building works with the minimum amount of data. Now, I want to talk one thing about energy in Kuwait, because I looked into the figures here, and there's a lot to be done in Kuwait on energy, because the vast majority is being used on oil and gas. And in fact, if you look at your energy usage, it is going up and up and up, even though we're getting more efficient lighting and more efficient everything. So it just illustrates that really there has to be a change. Like many countries, I've recently had the Singapore delegation and a Malaysian delegation, and they were equally poor on this level. And the amount of renewable energy being used in Kuwait is like 0.35 of 1%. I remember the last time I was in Kuwait, it was very, very sunny. And I think really Kuwait has to start making a big contribution to moving away from oil and gas to solar and wind and other renewables contracts, because as you can see here, we do fairly well on sunlight, certainly compared to the UK. Now, I've been through this before briefly on the high risk. This is how we deliver the insights to a building manager on what happens in an emergency. We literally know how many people on every single one of your floors, but how many of those people have got a mobility issue. And as it's evacuating, you have all the data of how many people in each stairway, how long it's going to take based on this data for your building to evacuate. And this is where we use the AI. We look at how many stairways, the people, where the variations of where they are, right down to age groups. And that will give us the data to push through the algorithms to give you and your fire service in Kuwait or Saudi Arabia or the UK or London or New York, what is going to happen and also what's happening in real time. This is a real impact we want to move forward on. I'm now running out of time, so this illustrates just how bad things are. 62 floors, 13,000 people, and we've got buildings that are built with 2 stairways. It illustrates that we've got a massive issue here, and we can't keep on building buildings like this without having the right insights on how to evacuate. With that, I'm going to jump off.
All right.
Take questions.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Walter. Does anybody have any questions? We are at time, but I'd like to allow for a question. They've been very timid with their questions today.
They're all very shy. Try and get them out of the shell.
Very good. There's one comment I want to make for you. There's an initiative over here that I'm a part of. It's called Engineering for One Planet. I think you might be interested in the goals and objective. It's really about getting engineers to start thinking about designing things for the future and sustainability. So it's a real good program. So Engineering for One Planet, the EOP framework. Google that, and you'll see some interesting documents.
Right, because look, we just got to move. We got to move on. That's the whole thing. We got to start making decisions, and there is too much procrastination. Okay, thank you so much for your time.
All right, Rafael, I believe you're on up next. He's the director of Futures Diamond Ltd in the UK. So, Rafael, I'd like to introduce you, and
yes, hello.
Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi,
how are you?
Okay, good. I will be sharing my screen now. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. Well, thank you for the invitation to deliver this talk, this keynote. It's focused on foresight-driven knowledge transfer for anticipating and monitoring emerging technologies and disruptive innovations, the green iceberg approach. The talk will be based on the knowledge gathered for over 20 years, first working at the United Nations Industrial Development Organization for Latin America and the Caribbean in the first place, and therefore Central and Eastern Europe and newly independent states. I'm still linked and working with colleagues from Manchester University, where I joined and did my PhD on foresight with a focus on science, technology, and innovation policy. So the talk will be based on innovation ecosystem knowledge gathered from several experiences and projects for over 20 years there. And also as an entrepreneur, so I like to talk what I do. So many scholars talk about science, technology, innovation without any close connection with entrepreneurship. So Futures Diamond is not the first company I have initiated and not the last. So there will be lessons learned from that and activities that are featured from that. I'm living in Finland still. I moved to PTT, Technical Research Center of Finland in 2016 as principal scientist, again, foresight-driven business strategies, lessons learned. And I had a short period teaching in a master's program in National Research University, Higher School of Economics in Moscow. Currently, I am an adjunct professor in the Turku School of Economics in Finland Futures Research Center. And I work very closely with Poland. I have a Polish family, Polish wife, so Poland is very close to my heart. And I helped to establish the first Center for Foresight and Internationalization, and the current one, which I am leading as director in Technology Partners Foundation with 20+ years experience in international collaboration. And then Green Iceberg is a newly established enterprise, so entrepreneurship goes on in my career as president and co-founder. And a connection with technologies and innovation is also very strong academically. I'm visiting professor in Białystok University of Technology and Warsaw University of Technology. So this talk will be based on knowledge gathered through this timeline, structured around 5 main slots. First, what is foresight-driven knowledge transfer? Then horizon scanning, a selection of best practices that I have made together with the European Innovation Council and the European Commission Joint Research Center. 4 projects I have been involved, either as leader or work package leaders that were selected because of best practices in Europe. And then the ongoing work in partnership with Kira, AI, artificial intelligence group in Spain and in other parts of Europe and the world, also in the US, how to manage innovation ecosystems. So let's kick off this keynote with understanding of what is foresight and how to plan ahead. Foresight, smart foresight, is a participatory, systematic, and prospective policy-oriented process aimed at anticipating, recommending and transforming a wide range of futures, technological, economic, environmental, political, social. So it's a process, and it requires scoping. It requires mobilizing a wide range of stakeholders to do what I mentioned, anticipating, recommending, and transforming. And it must be carefully planned. It might sound easy, this fancy acronym, SMART, but actually the scoping process requires careful planning of different steps, the aims and the objectives, the methodology of the project. The time horizon is not the same to look 10, 20 years ahead than to look 100 years ahead, like a project we recently completed for the UAE Space Agency, looking at 100 years. What are the critical technologies that humans settling on Mars in the next 100 years will be needed, critical life support systems. So time horizon for a project, deep space project on Mars, requires 100 or 100+ years to plan. You need to mobilize multiple stakeholders. Sounds easy, but you need to plan ahead. You need to mobilize the so-called sponsors, champions, the research support team, the methodology and domain experts, and the networks you want to collaborate to do what? To anticipate futures through visions, scenarios, wildcards, low probability, high impact events, weak signals, analysis of drivers, trends, mega trends, SWOT analysis, pathways, roadmaps, action roadmaps, technology roadmaps in order to achieve a desirable future, ideally with shared visions, or to prevent an undesirable one. So scenarios and forecastings are important. Key and emerging and disruptive technologies play a role into what I call the core or the heart of foresight and future studies, which is actually the phase of recommending ways of transforming, the transformation of priorities, strategies. And there is a whole lecture on this. This is not the place for this keynote, but I just wanted to give you a flavor that the SMART process requires planning. And if you want to do foresight-driven knowledge transfer, it is important to understand that knowledge valorization, which is the tip of the iceberg, commercialization of IP, spin-off creation, focuses on harnessing innovation. And we're talking about innovation ecosystems later on in the talk, marketable solutions. And here, public procurement is important, incubator, legal services. But this is not happening by magic. This is nurture, and it heavily depends on what I call foresight-driven knowledge co-creation, which is about collaborative research, contract research, where knowledge is actually co-created and upgraded, hopefully to valorize, to commercializable knowledge. But this doesn't happen by magic. So the metaphor of the iceberg goes on. What holds the iceberg together is what people cannot see, which is deep dive into knowledge sharing through professional education, executive education courses, master's programs, but also short certificates, training courses, and networking events. Conferences like this one are catalytic, are helping people to connect, to do matchmaking, to understand who you can really share knowledge with, and then who you can co-create and then later on valorize. So this is just to start understanding what is foresight-driven knowledge transfer. And it is important to focus on the future. Horizon scanning is really important, especially about emerging technologies and disruptive innovations. But these concepts are slippery and they depend on time and geographical context. The technologies of today in a developed country or perhaps in a Nordic European country might be the technologies of the future in 10, 20 years' time, even in developing countries, in another region, or even in the South, in different parts of Europe, you can see that you will find different pathways of development. So geographical contexts matter. And the concept of disruptive innovations can be divided into low-level disruptions, according to scholars, offering more affordable solutions with acceptable performance, or even very disruptive innovations that create new markets, right? So, or entirely new segments as well in markets. The European Commission, in the European context, it's putting a lot of effort in trying to understand how to boost, how to invest into emerging technologies and disruptive innovations to be one step ahead and to enhance industrial leadership. In particular, the European Innovation Council has launched a 10 billion euro program to identify, develop, and scale innovative and disruptive technologies. And I was approached by the Joint Research Center, the European Union group working on foresight in the Joint Research Center, and in collaboration with the European Innovation Council to focus on 4 best practices that I have been actively involved in, either as project leader and coordinator or scientific leader of the research agenda. And we selected jointly 4 cases, which I will be briefly highlighting here. But this publication from the previous slide is freely available. The link is there. I believe maybe the conference organizers will distribute the slides. If not, you can simply put the title in Google and you will find it's a publicly available and free report. So this set of slides are just giving you a flavor of each of the case studies, why they were selected jointly with the European Commission, why are they important. The first is the all but gold, I would say, one of the pioneering horizon scanning and foresight projects in Europe and the world, really developing state-of-the-art methods and approaches to understand very complex events, wildcards, the so-called low probability, high impact, black swans, wildcards, and weak signals that are early warnings indicating that a wildcard might happen. So how to analyze those wildcards and weak signals to formulate research and innovation priorities. Here, what was important in the process was to use this multi-perception complexity and coexisting assumptions framework, where we put experts and participants confronting existing paradigms. So what if the South is actually upwards and then the North-South? So if we change our perspective, this is the world we know, just from an Australian perspective, who didn't actually like where Australia is in the current worldwide world map. So they decided to portray the world this way. But when you change your world views, it matters. You might feel lost. You might not find where you are at the moment, where you were born or where you've been traveling, depending on your current location. So this is an important exercise to do in workshops, in interviews, in order to understand, having a pre-selected list of weak signals, to use the issues analysis framework, which is the main contribution that we were bringing in this project, systematically in workshops with experts and with domain experts, to interpret different weak signals in order to understand, depending on the situation, and assess whether we will see some issues continuing in the future and more wildcards that we have seen before. So that's one type of perception, whether the weak signals can be a signal of something ending, a new technology coming, then an old technology will end. So the old story of what happened to Nokia, for example, and new players emerging. Or, for example, we use this framework, and in the red report on the top right, which is also free, the I know policy alerts, in 2011, we already analyzed COVID, 2011. So when COVID came, we came up with that COVID wildcard and recommendations, which nobody took in the Commission, nobody listened to that, or in Europe or in part of the world. Our aim was to prove that wildcards and weak signals analysis can lead to interesting disruption. So we actually analyzed COVID and even call it like that in 2011. And that was thanks to thinking about re-emerging issues, because pandemics are not new developments. We had pandemics in the past. So with experts, we were thinking about these issues of viruses, the killer virus, and it was the first one. So recently, after COVID came, then the media contacted me to interview me. Hey, this was the guy or the group, the project that identified the pandemic 10 years ago. What happened? What do you feel? But this type of work is important not only to understand re-emerging issues, but new ones, emerging new technologies, disruptive innovation. So that framework, we recommended for every project that the Commission is hopefully funding for those 10 billion euros, or anyone looking into disruptive innovations, to apply similar framework to run workshops. The second project we highlighted was the Technology Horizon project, where we develop a knowledge platform for the Department of Health in the UK to map, to analyze different type of barriers, wildcards, and weak signals, but also technological developments shaping the future of healthcare, social care, and public health in the UK, in the department, for the Department of Health. We analyze over 300 emerging technologies. We cluster them into 200 using different type of approaches, web scanning, trends analysis, until we arrive to a reasonable list of 2 therapeutic, 2 diagnostic, 3 enabling, 2 preventive, and 1 organizational key technologies. And we applied the double funnel approach to look into their implications for workforce planning, because this work was done for the Center for Workforce Intelligence. And we drew lessons from health technology assessment exercises from Australia, New Zealand, Canada, looking outward, outside the UK, US, Denmark, Sweden, and Spain, of course, looking inward as well. So we organized different expert interviews, brainstorming, and desk research. And we produced a report, which is also freely available, about those 10 technologies. This keynote is not about health technologies, but the report is you can find it as well in my blog or in Google if you're interested in the topic. The third case is very relevant to the topic of this conference. It's about artificial intelligence for cybersecurity. It's a project recently completed for the European Union Agency for Cybersecurity, where we used over 10 methods combining the 4 sources of knowledge, which I have positioned in the literature as the foresight diamond, where creativity is important. So wildcard is kind of like the ultimate creativity, because you need to think about very low probability events that might have high impact, or evidence-based literature review, extrapolation, bibliometrics, patent analysis were methods that we were using there, interaction and expertise, in order to apply the SMART process, SMART foresight process, but also going beyond evaluating, sustaining, and training. So that we think that we can move from SMART to smartest by using this approach. And we identify some 12 positive trends shaping the future of cybersecurity, trends in artificial intelligence. So if you are interested into specific trends, you can get access to this presentation, hopefully, after my talk, and 10 negative trends as well, because there are developments. AI is contributing positively to cybersecurity, definitely, no doubt about it, but also is contributing negatively, because what you can use to do good can also be used to do harm. So business, they need to take care about developments in AI that are shaping. The fourth and last case was the combined CASI and Bolero projects that develop a very systematic inductive approach to analysis and to the assessment and management of sustainable innovation. So 3 steps for assessment and 2 steps for management. The first step for assessment, we built a large database of over 500 innovations across the whole European Union landscape. That was before Brexit, so we had 28 EU member states there. We had nearly 200 product innovations in the database, over 100 service innovations, so 7 types: social, organizational, governance, system, and marketing innovations. We selected carefully using some criteria together with the University of Manchester and Coventry University and over 19 partners and country correspondents covering all Europe, 200 case studies that we consider appropriate for the second step, higher deep dive assessment that led to over 1,700 critical issues consisting of barriers, drivers, opportunities, and threats. We analyze them because no manager will read over 1,000 critical issues, not even 100. So we created 60 half-tweets managerial lessons. And based on that analysis of critical issues, we built we use a very inductive approach to build an action road mapping and management, an innovation management approach consisting of 4 dimensions and 10 key aspects, which are based on critical factors coming from all this analysis. We also develop policy agendas looking at the objectives, short, medium, and long terms of all these innovators. So we have over 1,800 sustainability-oriented objectives, which were clustered by category and typology of innovation, but ultimately innovators and policy actors only like short number of policy agendas. So we arrived to a list of 10 research and innovation agendas, which are also available in another report and a chapter. But story short, we use that inductive approach and the innovation management framework we built, and we piloted with 43 innovators. And we developed over 700 recommendations specific for them. And we arrived to meta lessons. We analyzed short, digestible lessons. But most importantly, we co-created with them 46 action roadmaps, which during the life of the project, 80% of those were implemented or in implementation phase, leading to a large number of lessons and training courses that we capture all of these lessons into a book, a Springer book, together with Mattia Martini and Rick Holzen from Milano Bicocca University and Dortmund University. We edited and wrote a book called Governance and Management of Sustainable Innovation, capturing the lessons from the previous case. But most importantly, we gave an afterlife to the CASI project. We built the Bolero project, which is focused on the Milano region in Italy, with a strong emphasis on SMEs and startups in the Lombardia region. And this project introduced a new approach, both CASI and Bolero, to action road mapping, focused on the context, people, process, and impact dimension, and based on 10 key aspects. What was perhaps the most interesting finding from introducing this managerial approach is that people normally forget about people. So the people layer, the people dimension, was prioritized by innovators, and that consisted of 2 key aspects: the aptitude, which is the competences and skills to manage innovation, but most importantly, in many cases, regardless of whether you have the aptitude, the competence and skills, you must have the right attitude. They can do, they can innovate, they can trade, they can transfer knowledge and absorb and move to the next level. So the attitude box in the road mapping became the most important. Now, how to manage innovation?
Rafael, I hate to interrupt you, but we're out of time.
Yes, I have a couple of slides.
Okay.
How to manage all this? We are now building a partnership with Kira, Artificial Intelligence Group, to understand innovation ecosystems, to build ecosystems virtually with the help of AI to understand the needs, the innovation offer and the innovation demand from companies or startups, the innovators, to understand disruptive technologies with the help of AI, also using AI to disrupt the understanding in different areas, energy, life science, and to recognize which technologies match which each areas and which sectors and industries. This platform is ongoing. We are at the moment, as we speak, further developing the functionalities in order to help to build a brain based on trends, follow-ups. We have a dashboard, an innovation map to understand the market map, scouting challenges. So we have a whole presentation on this as well. And the dashboard helps to understand how to centralize the ecosystems patterns and the values. The last slides are recommendations for those who are joining us today. First recommendation is it's really important to apply the issues analysis framework and to conduct systematically action road mapping, to understand the importance of critical issues, the cross-cutting funding opportunities that are there, not only in the European Innovation Council, but at ministry level, nationally and internationally, the cross-fertilization of innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem. Then it is important to build these platforms and to maintain them, to systematically manage critical issues. And the last slide, thank you for your attention, is the ecosystem players who can master both foresight-driven knowledge transfer and control the intelligence, both human and artificial, will lead the way in industry and innovation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very good presentation. Anybody have a quick question? I think we're running into the next session.
Yes,
already.
thank you so much, Rafael. Is this dashboard ready for use, or just it's for your own implementation?
Yeah, we are happy to engage in discussions bilaterally. You can reach me through the app and via email. We are piloting at the moment this dashboard with engaged entrepreneurial and polytechnic and or University of Technology. So we are happy to, if you are in a university, to pilot it and to work with you, because we are building this type of university and academia-oriented case studies. If you are in industry, I didn't get, because I'm still sharing the screen. Maybe I can stop sharing and I can see where you're based. No, but you can maybe stop video here. No, but I'm happy to engage with you bilaterally later on. But
No
yes,
problem. Thank you so much. It was a very valuable presentation.
Very
Specifically, will be on spot about the innovation ecosystem.
You can reach me via LinkedIn. Here is my LinkedIn link. And then
Okay,
we can discuss that. Thank you very much.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. Thank you.